Hi, I'm Venna. My family used to say, family doesn't betray. But one day they sat me down, calmly, politely, and told me I didn't belong anymore. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just forged signatures, a fake will, a quiet removal from everything I had once called home. They didn't just cut me off, they erased me, then turned the story into their own. They sued me, defamed me, cropped me out of family videos like I'd never existed. And when I uncovered the truth, all it took was one document, just one, to turn their perfect lie into a courtroom silence. But the question is, why would a family go this far to rewrite someone out of their own life? The smell of rosemary and lemon chicken filled the air, mixing with the warmth of freshly baked bread and too many artificial smiles. We were seated around an oversized dining table in Ruth and Darwin's dining room, my parents' house, technically. But nothing about that evening felt like home. Not even the framed photos lining the wall, where my face grew smaller with each passing year. I hadn't been to one of these family gatherings in over 8 months. Work had kept me in Austin, and truthfully, I'd been making excuses to stay away. But when Ruth called last week, her voice soft with age and syrupy with invitation, I thought maybe things had changed. Maybe they missed me. As I stepped into the room, I felt the shift instantly. Conversations paused, just long enough for heads to turn and eyes to scan. Vera stood near the entryway, one arm looped around a wine glass, the other perched on her hip like she owned the night. She offered a perfectly arched smile, the kind people give just before they say something ugly but legal. "Venna," she said lightly, "we weren't sure you'd make it, with your schedule and all." I kissed Ruth's cheek, nodded at Darwin, and made my way to the end of the table. Not one place card bore my name, but an empty seat had been set, near the kitchen door, a drafty corner away from the laughter at the center. I told myself it didn't matter. During dinner, Ruth tapped her glass and stood, holding a paper napkin in place of a note. "Family," she began, "is a promise. We may stumble, we may even clash, but family doesn't betray. We show up. We love anyway." There were murmurs of agreement, a few raised glasses. I chewed the inside of my cheek. Later that night, after most of the dishes were cleared and the cousins had taken their drama to the patio, Ruth asked if I could stay behind. Her voice was too soft, the kind used with fragile animals and fragile truths. "I wanted to speak with you privately," she began, pouring 2 cups of peppermint tea, but only placing one on the table. "You've changed, Venna." I tilted my head. "Changed how?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her tea, stirring a non-existent sugar cube. "It's not just me," she said. "Vera's been concerned. Your father. Well, we all feel like there's a lot of tension. It might be better, for now, if you stayed elsewhere when you visit." I blinked, then blinked again. "Are you asking me to leave?" She finally looked up. "Just for now, until things settle. I'm sure you understand." I didn't. But I nodded anyway, stood up, and walked to the coat rack by the front door. As I pulled on my jacket, no one came to see me out. Not Ruth, not Darwin, not even Vera, who had moved on to wine number 3 and was laughing too hard at something I couldn't hear. Outside, the porch light buzzed, casting a weak glow across the driveway. I climbed into my car, rested my hands on the steering wheel, and sat there for a moment, listening to the sound of my own breath. No footsteps behind me, no calls. Just the creak of an old house settling and the weight of a silence I hadn't expected to feel so deeply. The next morning, back in Austin, I noticed a small cardboard box sitting on my doorstep. There was no return address, but I didn't need one. The handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was the birthday gift I had sent Ruth 2 weeks earlier. A hand-knitted scarf, dusty rose, soft as memory. Underneath it, a photo of us in the garden when I was 12, our hands covered in soil and smiles. I'd written a note on the back. Maybe we could start fresh. The scarf was still folded, the photo still wrapped in tissue. Neither had been touched. I sat on the porch with the box in my lap, the morning sun doing little to chase away the chill that settled in my chest. I ran my fingers along the knit rows, each loop a piece of me offered and returned unopened. "Family doesn't betray," Ruth had said. "But what do you call it when they ask you to vanish? Nicely?" Sometimes betrayal doesn't come with slammed doors or screaming matches. Sometimes it walks in wearing pearls and politeness, smiles while it removes your chair, and hands you your coat like a guest who stayed too long. That night, I realized something that would change everything. Being born into a family doesn't mean you belong. Back in Austin, the quiet felt like it had grown teeth. The apartment was exactly as I left it, neat, undisturbed, and colder than usual. I dropped my overnight bag by the door, stepped out of my shoes, and walked straight to the kitchen table, not bothering to turn on the lights. The late afternoon sun streamed in through the blinds in long, tired stripes. I should have known better than to think that weekend would bring closure, but I didn't expect the absence to echo so loudly when I returned. I set down the stack of mail I'd gathered from my box downstairs. Most of it was what you'd expect. Bank statements, coupons I never use, a letter from a nonprofit I used to donate to. But one envelope stood out. Beige, thick paper, with the county seal in the corner. My heart paused. Inside were updated property documents for the Dallas house. I frowned. I hadn't requested anything. Flipping through the pages, my eyes landed on the section listing ownership. There was only one name, Vera Cessna. No Vena Marceau. No shared ownership, no co-title holder. I read it twice, slowly, hoping I'd misread something. I hadn't. I picked up my phone, called the Dallas County Recorder's office. The woman on the other end sounded like she had answered the same question 100 times that day. "Hi, I'm calling to verify a deed update I just received. Can you tell me when this change was processed?" There was a clicking of keys, a pause, and then she replied, "That was finalized about 5 weeks ago. All parties signed. Everything looks clean." "All parties?" I repeated, sitting up straighter. "You're sure about that?" "Yep. Looks like digital signatures were submitted. Timestamped. I can email you the copies if you like." I gave her my email, thanked her, and ended the call. The email came through 2 minutes later. I opened the attachments, and there it was. My name, my supposed signature. Except it wasn't mine. The slant was wrong. The loop on the V was too tight. And I never abbreviated my name on legal forms. Vena, not VM. It was just off enough to make my stomach clench. I pulled out older copies of the deed from my file cabinet, laid them side by side with the new ones. There was no denying it now. Someone had removed me and covered their tracks with a forgery. I stood there staring at the documents for a while, letting the truth seep in. They didn't yell, they didn't argue, they just filed me away. Neatly, like a loose paper in a folder they were done with. I whispered into the quiet of the room. Betrayal isn't always a knife. Sometimes it's a form quietly missing from the mail. To distract myself, I opened Facebook and started scrolling. A notification popped up, a memory from the reunion. Vera had posted a photo, the whole family, posed on the porch, arms wrapped around each other, like a Christmas card in March. At first glance, it looked warm. Perfect. But as I looked closer, I noticed something odd. The original photo had been taken with a wide angle. There was room for at least 10 people, yet this version was cropped tightly. I wasn't in it. Not a trace. Not even a sliver of my shoulder. I zoomed in. Nothing. And then I saw the comments. "So proud of you, Vera. You really hold the family together. Just like your mama, carrying the legacy forward. This family is lucky to have you." I didn't respond. Didn't click like. Just stared at the screen until it blurred. It wasn't about the photo, not really. It was the rewriting. The way someone can retell a story so many times that eventually, the real version fades, gets replaced. I thought of the years I helped cover mortgage payments with my federal bonuses. The nights I drove Ruth to her specialist in Fort Worth, when Vera was too busy with showings. The weekends I mowed the lawn when Darwin's knees gave out. None of that made it into the version of the family they were selling. Maya Angelou's voice echoed in my head. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And maybe when they crop you out of a photo, it's because they've been cropping you out emotionally for years. I closed the laptop, slid the forged documents into a folder, and stared out the window. Somewhere across the city, the sun was beginning to drop behind the skyline. I could hear kids playing in the courtyard below, a dog barking faintly in the distance. Life moved on. But that night, something shifted inside me. Not a scream, not a crash, just a quiet understanding that hit harder than either. I didn't lose my place in the family. It was edited out, one polite omission at a time. The papers were still on my dining table from the day before, stacked, not filed. I didn't touch them until the sun had fully disappeared behind the skyline, casting long amber shadows across the floor. My dinner sat untouched beside my laptop, steam long gone. I wasn't hungry. I needed answers. I pulled out the accordion folder, where I kept every relevant document tied to the house. Tax records, insurance notices, scanned deeds, bank statements. I'd never thought I'd need to treat my own family like a fraud investigation, but that night, I did. I wasn't angry. Not yet. There was too much calculation in me, too much muscle memory from my federal training. Fraud never yells. It whispers, waits, watches. I've seen it enough times to know it's always about subtle control, until someone calls it out. It didn't take long before something stood out, a PDF labeled Family Financial Transition Agreement. I didn't remember signing it, but my name was there, clear, printed, signed. I opened the file and stared. My name was typed beneath the signature line. The signature, however, was another story. The slant was too steep, the loops too sharp. My pen never moves that way. I've signed my name on thousands of forms in uniform, under pressure, in daylight and dim bunkers. This wasn't mine. I leaned closer, examining the digital copy. Whoever had done this had been bold, maybe even sloppy. They'd used a digital scan, one probably taken from an old email chain or doctor's release form. They didn't expect I'd ever ask questions. They didn't even try to hide it, I muttered aloud. That's how certain they were that I wouldn't question it. I opened a fresh folder on my desktop, titled it Forgery Evidence, and began dragging in files, comparing my real signature with the fake one, photographing physical copies, cross-referencing dates. The deeper I dug, the more deliberate it felt. This wasn't some clerical mix-up. It was a plan, signed, sealed, and already activated. The second blow came when I decided to run a credit check. Call it instinct. Or maybe just habit. I'd seen enough identity theft cases tied to dead veterans and estranged spouses to know how easy it was to replicate a name when the paper trail already blurred the truth. There it was. A flagged account. Boutique investment firm. Opened 2 months ago, under my social, my email, my former address. But the contact listed for correspondence? Vera Cessna. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I called the firm, softened my voice, and said, "Hi, this is Marla. I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Marceau. She's currently updating her legal records and asked me to confirm the account details you have on file." The rep on the other end hesitated, then rattled off details. Account creation, initial deposit, verification done over the phone, recorded line. "Thank you," I said, masking the fire in my voice. "That's all I needed." I set the phone down slowly, like it might explode. I wasn't just removed. I was replaced, and then reused like a shell. My body felt light, like I'd stepped outside of it. It wasn't grief anymore. It was something colder, quieter. Strategy. There's a difference between being excluded and being exploited. I'd thought I was grieving a relationship, but I wasn't. I was uncovering a business model. I printed every record I had, every screenshot, every confirmation email. I began organizing them into labeled folders by topic, date, and point of fraud. I included financial discrepancies, login data, file creation metadata. I wasn't doing this for courtroom drama. I was building a case they didn't think I'd have the nerve to build. Outside, the city dimmed. Streetlights blinked on. A couple argued in the unit next door, their voices muffled through the wall as I stared at the monitor, face lit in blue. My apartment, small and often lonely, had become a war room, and I was no longer the one losing sleep. We all would be. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Benjamin Franklin once said that. But tonight, I was both. They forged my name on paper, but they forgot whose hands taught them how to write it. Tuesday morning arrived cloaked in a soft, steady rain that tapped rhythmically against the kitchen window. I hadn't slept much the night before. My body rested, but my mind spun like a faulty fan blade, grinding through every detail of the past week. I sat at my laptop, coffee cooling in a ceramic mug beside me, the inbox open but unread. My eyes were drawn to a flagged message at the top of the thread. The subject line was vague, update, but the sender was unmistakable. Paul Cessna, Vera's husband. I clicked it open. It was a reply all, and not meant for me. The email thread was originally between Vera, Paul, and Ruth, with a subject line changed several times before settling into what now looked like a financial strategy discussion. Paul's message, typed in his usual curt tone, said, "Let's not poke the bear. Just keep her out long enough for everything to finalize." I read it twice, then a third time. Her was me. Attached were PDFs, financial breakdowns labeled post-Vena transition, schedules, deadlines, transfer dates. They had built a timeline around my exclusion, like I was an expense to be eliminated. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood, slow and measured, and walked to the printer. The machine hissed to life, feeding out each page like confession. I laid the documents next to the forged signature forms. The pattern was becoming clearer and uglier. "They didn't just erase me," I whispered. "They scheduled it like a business move." I remembered a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt I'd read once, something about justice not being justice if it only favored one side. That morning, I decided I wasn't going to be the quiet side anymore. By noon, I was in my car, windshield wipers slapping at the rain, knuckles pale on the steering wheel. The drive back to Dallas was 3 hours. I didn't stop for gas or food, just music low, my breath steady, the seat warmer on full blast, like it could melt the betrayal lodged in my ribs. The closer I got to the house, the harder the rain fell. It wasn't cinematic, no thunderclaps or dramatic lightning, just constant, drenching, and indifferent. The porch light was already on when I pulled into the driveway. For a second, I wondered if they expected me. Maybe they had seen the email trail and knew the reckoning was coming. But when I stepped out, no one met me at the door. I knocked. It was Ruth who answered, a dish rag in her hand, confusion flickering across her face. Vera appeared behind her, a glass of wine dangling between 2 fingers, like always. "I got an email," I said, holding up the folder as water dripped from my coat. Vera rolled her eyes before I could say more. "Vena, don't do this. You're jumping to conclusions." "Am I?" "You're not well," she added, voice syrupy. "This obsession isn't healthy." Ruth stepped forward, voice barely above a whisper. Maybe you should come back another day." I took a breath, steady but firm. "I drove 3 hours for this. Don't you dare tell me to come back later." From the hallway behind them, Darwin's voice drifted in, flat and distant. "Ruth, let it go." The door moved, slowly at first, then with resolve. It clicked shut before I could say anything more. I didn't knock again. I stood on the porch, motionless, folder still in hand. The rain didn't let up. It soaked through my coat, my hair, the seams of my boots. Then my grip loosened. The folder dropped with a wet smack onto the concrete. Pages spilled out like secrets, ink already starting to blur. The words, "finalize," "transfer," "removal." bled into one another, dissolving like promises. I didn't pick them up, I just stared. Rain makes paper useless. Maybe that's what they thought of me, too. I turned and walked away. No umbrella, no goodbye, no need. They left me outside with nothing but proof, and even that was dissolving in the rain. The phone rang a little after 11. I recognized the number before the screen finished lighting up. Ruth. I let it ring twice before answering. "Venna," she said, her voice wrapped in a sugary calm that had grown more suspicious to me lately. "We're having lunch here tomorrow, just the family. Vera suggested it. We think we all need a little reset, a fresh page." I stayed quiet. She continued, "We don't want bad blood, baby. Come talk things through. Let's not keep carrying this weight." It was the kind of call you get when people aren't sorry, just inconvenienced. But I agreed. I told her I'd be there at noon, then hung up before she could add any more fake warmth. The next morning, I dressed in something neutral. No black, no power suit, just clean lines, gray tones. I wanted no one to say I came to intimidate. In my bag, I carried copies of the documents I'd printed out, just in case clarity became necessary. The drive to Dallas was uneventful. Overcast skies followed me like a passive witness. When I arrived, the front door was already open. Ruth met me with a practiced smile and a hug that barely touched my shoulders. Vera stood behind her, arms crossed, offering no such pretense. Darwin didn't rise from his seat at the head of the dining table. The table was already set, for 4. Ruth gestured to the open chair. "Let's sit. No need for tension." We sat. The room was quiet in that stiff way only families can manage. Vera reached for a manila folder in front of her and slid it across the table to me. Ruth folded her hands. "It's just a formality, honey. A mutual disassociation. It releases you from the property and the financial burden. It's clean, peaceful." Vera chimed in without looking at me. "This way you can heal too, away from all this mess." I opened the folder. A legal document, 3 pages long. My name filled the blanks like a ghost. I read each line, every soft, weaponized phrase. Mutual agreement, harmonious resolution, release of claim. I exhaled slowly, laid the folder back down. Then I looked up. "This isn't peace," I said. "It's a gag order disguised as a gift basket." Darwin's eyes didn't move from his coffee. "I'm not here to be erased politely," I added. Silence. Ruth finally spoke. "We just thought, with everything that's been said online and how things have escalated." I said nothing. I interrupted. "I didn't have to." A knock at the door interrupted us. Perfect timing. A neighbor stepped in, one of Ruth's church friends. She had that awkward kindness of someone who showed up just to be seen. Vera stood to greet her, and with theatrical timing, pulled a cream-colored shawl from the back of the chair. She draped it over her arm. "She made it for me," Vera said brightly. "Thoughtful, right?" I froze. I knew that shawl. I had made it, hand-woven, months of stitching during quiet evenings, every thread a distraction from the growing silence in our family. It was for Ruth's birthday, and now it was Vera's prop. I didn't say a word. I walked over, placed my hand on the shawl, just for a moment. My fingers traced the edge, where I had hidden a single pale blue thread. An imperfection on purpose. It was still there. I pulled my hand back and returned to my seat. They took my hands. They took my words. Then they wrapped themselves in them, I thought. I stood. Ruth looked startled. "You're leaving?" "I'm not signing anything. Not today. Not ever." Vera scoffed. "So you're just going to keep dragging this out?" I looked her in the eye. "I won't sign away my place to make your story cleaner. If you want to erase me, you'll have to do it without my help." I picked up my bag, turned, and walked toward the door. And for the first time, I didn't walk away defeated. I walked away defiant. The rain hadn't stopped. It came in sheets now, hammering against the windows like it had something personal to say. I stood in the hallway of my building, the manila envelope in my hand heavier than it should have been. It had been sitting in my mailbox all morning, tucked beneath grocery circulars and an overdue water bill. But unlike the others, this one had my full name printed across the front in bold block lettering. Formal, deliberate. Back upstairs, I peeled off my damp jacket, tossed it on the hook by the door, and dropped the rest of the mail on the kitchen counter. The envelope stayed in my hands. I opened it slowly, like it might bite. Inside, a lawsuit, filed by Vera, co-signed by Darwin. I read the heading once, then again. Plaintiffs allege that defendant Vena Marceau has exerted undue emotional pressure upon Ruth Marceau, resulting in compromised decision-making and the unlawful reassignment of family assets for personal gain. I didn't move for a long time. There was no preamble, no letter, no explanation, just pages and pages of accusations dressed up in legal jargon, emotional manipulation, financial interference, exploitation during illness. I'd seen language like this before, on fraud cases, domestic guardianship disputes, but never, with my own name listed as the offender, and my family as the plaintiffs. They didn't just kick me out, I whispered. They decided I was dangerous enough to silence through the courts. I laid the lawsuit down on the table next to the now familiar pile of signatures, deed transfers, and property records. It was almost impressive, the scope of it, the audacity, to paint me as the thief when all I had done was give, quietly, for years. I took a deep breath, pulled out my laptop, and opened my professional profile, my resume, references, contact info. I intended to post a short clarification, something calm and dignified, let the truth speak for itself. But when I logged in, a red banner stretched across the screen. Account locked. I tried again. Same result. I opened my website. Page not found. What? I called my hosting provider. The support rep placed me on hold, then returned a few minutes later. Hi, Ms. Marceau. Yes, we're seeing several impersonation reports filed against your domain and profile. Same IP, repeated filings over several days. Where's the IP from? I asked, already knowing. Pause. Clicks. Dallas. Of course. They weren't just suing me, they were scrubbing me, erasing every version of me from public view like I never existed. And the worst part? It was working. You don't need to scream, I muttered, when you can unplug someone's mic. I stared at the blank screen for a moment, then stood up slowly. I didn't cry, didn't call anyone. Instead, I went to the cabinet, pulled out my portable hard drive, and started scanning everything. Emails, bank transfers, photos of the deed side by side with the forged one, copies of the shawl with metadata. Every lie, every erasure, each file got a label, each folder a title. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about survival, with precision. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't tapped in nearly 3 years. Leah Bowers. Former analyst. Ex-gov contractor. Quiet. Lethal with metadata. I texted, "Need help tracking digital sabotage? It's personal." She responded less than a minute later. "Send files, I'll start tonight." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. They had taken my place at the table, stolen my voice, rewritten my history, but I hadn't forgotten how to fight. They tried to drown me in paper, but I'd spent my life reading between the lines. It was a Saturday, mid-afternoon, the kind where people pretend they're not reading each other's conversations from across cafe tables. I sat at my usual spot near the window, coffee in hand, pretending to focus on emails. But I could feel it, even before I heard it. "She's the one from that post," one woman whispered behind me. "The family thing. Church folks said it got ugly." "She always looked cold," the other said, like she was holding in something. I didn't turn around, didn't flinch, just tapped open Facebook. At the top of my feed was a post from Vera. Pinned. Shared over 70 times. Sometimes the ones who seem most composed are the ones who manipulate the most. We pray for strength when trust is broken, even within families. The attached screenshots were of court documents, carefully cropped, legal terms highlighted without context, words like exploitation, undue influence, mental instability. Nothing concrete, just enough to feed speculation. The post was made in our old church group, the one where I used to lead donation drives and bake sale raffles. The comments were a chorus of praise for Vera. "Vera, you're so brave for speaking out." "Ruth deserves peace." "Some people are just toxic, even when they're blood." And then, one that made my stomach twist. "Cutting someone off doesn't mean you hate them, it means you respect your own peace." I saved every screenshot. I wasn't cut off, I was discarded, like a bruised apple on the edge of the produce display. Not rotten, just not perfect enough to keep. I left the cafe without finishing my coffee, the murmur of whispers still brushing my back like a second skin. Sunday evening came with a stormy glow in the sky, thick clouds rolling over Dallas like a curtain about to fall. A friend messaged me a live stream link. The community gala honoring Ruth's decades of volunteer work. I didn't plan to watch, but my thumb clicked anyway. There she was, standing at the podium in a navy blue suit, pearls tight at her throat. Vera stood beside her, beaming, hand on Ruth's shoulder, like she'd been guiding her there all along. Then the video tribute played. It was long, sentimental, full of family photos spanning decades, picnics, birthdays, Sunday mornings on church steps. I watched it unfold with a knot in my chest. At first, I thought maybe I'd missed myself in the early shots. Maybe they'd only chosen old pictures. But then I saw one. Thanksgiving 2 years ago, where I had sat beside Ruth, holding her arm. Cropped. The edge of my sleeve was visible, but my face was gone. The entire frame shifted to show only Vera, Ruth, and Darwin. Another clip showed a family reunion, music overlaid. I had been in that video too. I remembered the exact dress. But here? Now? Edited. I was gone. A text came in from an old classmate. "Hey! I didn't know you weren't in the family video. Are things okay?" I didn't reply. What was there to say? They hadn't just silenced me in court. They were erasing me in public, smiling while they did it. I downloaded the tribute video, opened my forensic tools, checked the metadata, the upload timestamps, the edit history. What I found confirmed what I suspected. Intentionally cropped frames, altered timestamps, adjusted tags. They wanted to build a legacy, one where I never existed. But I wasn't interested in begging for inclusion. I wasn't looking for apologies or a seat at their curated table. I was documenting a pattern, a narrative too clean to be true, too rehearsed to be real. Brené Brown once said, "The opposite of belonging is fitting in." And I understood that now. They didn't want me to belong. They wanted me to adjust, to shrink, to be digestible. I wasn't made for that. They edited me out of the video, but I was about to become the headline they couldn't control. The conference room was too quiet. Everything from the stale coffee smell to the soft tick of the wall clock seemed to be holding its breath. I sat at one end of the long table, hands resting on a manila folder, spine straight, voice silent. For now. The mediator, some middle-aged man with a neutral tie and overused phrases, glanced between us like a substitute teacher trying to stop a fight with eye contact alone. "This," he said, "is a chance to find resolution outside the courtroom. A healing space." Vera offered a small nod, her expression carved in porcelain, practiced sympathy on full display. Ruth, seated beside her, wouldn't meet my gaze. And Darwin, he stared at the blinds, as though the outside weather might provide a better escape than anything I was about to say. I let them start. Vera leaned forward, hands folded like a politician on a podium. "This isn't easy for any of us, Venna. Believe me, I've tried to keep things respectful. But your actions, your assumptions, have put a strain on all of us." She turned slightly, letting the mediator see the tight line of her mouth, the restraint. "We all want peace, but it's hard when one person keeps pulling open old wounds. I didn't blink. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small flash drive. "Before we go any further," I said, plugging it into the laptop on the table, "I think it's only fair everyone hears this." The room shifted. Not audibly, just energy. Vera's lips parted for a second, but no words came. The mediator hesitated, then nodded for me to continue. The audio crackled to life. Vera's voice filled the room. Clear, confident, unfiltered. "She won't fight back," she had said. "She's too proud and too alone. Let her believe she still matters. It keeps her manageable." Silence followed. Ruth's face drained of color. Darwin's hands clenched into slow fists, still resting on the table. Vera opened her mouth, closed it, looked to Ruth. Nothing. I stared at the screen, then back at each of them. "You didn't think I'd record it," I said softly. "You counted on me doing what I always did, being quiet." Ruth finally turned to me, voice fragile. "I didn't know about that recording." "But you knew what she said was true," I replied. Darwin cleared his throat, but no words came out at first. When they did, they hit harder than any slap. "I don't know if you're even my daughter anymore." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was cool, measured, meant to land where it hurt most. I blinked once, slowly. "Is that metaphorical?" I asked. "Or do you mean biologically?" He stared at me, then said, "You've brought shame to this family, Venna. You made us public." I could have laughed, could have cried. But what settled in my chest instead was a stillness I hadn't felt in weeks. It was clarity. "So that's what I am," I murmured. "Not a daughter, a liability." I reached across the table, unplugged the USB, and slid a folder across to the mediator. "In there," I said, "you'll find a preliminary lawsuit, on my behalf, against Vera, for defamation, financial fraud, and attempted identity suppression, with attachments." The mediator opened it, but didn't speak. I stood. "I didn't come here for peace. I came here for the truth to have a seat at this table." It did. No one moved to stop me as I left. Outside, the wind had picked up. Dallas smelled like a storm about to arrive. I stood by my car for a moment, breathing in the weight of the moment. I had more battles ahead, more documentation to file, more people to contact. But I'd just taken the microphone back. Turns out, the only thing more dangerous than a daughter they tried to silence is one who recorded everything. The padded envelope was waiting on my doormat when I got home that Thursday evening. No return address, just my name written in cursive I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, I hesitated. The weight of it in my hand felt heavier than paper should. Inside, tucked neatly between two cardboard sheets, was a handwritten will. Ruth's handwriting, unmistakable. Looped, precise, softened with age. Dated 4 years ago, before the shift, before Vera had taken over as the family's narrator. I unfolded the pages slowly, breath shallow, hands steady. Venna Marceau, sole beneficiary of the Dallas property. Paragraphs filled with notes about my support during Ruth's hip surgery. Mentions of my Sunday drives, grocery runs, nights spent on her couch when she couldn't sleep. It wasn't notarized, but it was real. A small note fell from the folder as I turned the last page. It was from Glenda. "I kept this because I had a feeling it might matter someday. I'm sorry I waited." I didn't cry. Not right then. I just stared at Ruth's words, proof that I hadn't imagined the closeness we once shared. The quiet dependence she had on me when Vera was off traveling, selling dreams to strangers. The contrast between this will and the one Vera had submitted to the court couldn't be more glaring. Dates didn't match. Tone didn't match. Ruth's signature, once fluid, had been replaced in the new version with a rigid, tight scrawl I didn't recognize. "She once meant it," I whispered. Somewhere between then and now, something, or someone, changed everything. It wasn't just erasure. It was overwrite. The next day, while picking up groceries, I ran into Vera's daughter and her babysitter at the bookstore near the corner. The little girl, wide-eyed and chewing on the sleeve of her jacket, looked at me like she was solving a puzzle. She tugged at her sitter's hand and pointed. "Mommy says you used to be family." The woman's eyes widened. "Let's pick out that book, sweetie." I knelt to the girl's height and smiled, keeping my voice warm. "Well," I said gently, "I guess I still am. Just not invited to the parties anymore." She tilted her head, like that answer almost made sense. That night, back home, I cleared my dining table and laid out the original and revised wills side by side. I highlighted the differences, printed out metadata from scanned files, logged timestamps, and began assembling the chain of edits. Not for sentiment, but for court. For clarity, not to win back love. That door had closed long ago. This was for truth. I opened a new folder on my desktop. Deposition diagram, property fraud. I filed each page like a scalpel, one cut deeper than the next. "We tell ourselves stories in order to live," Joan Didion once wrote. "But sometimes the story they tell about you is a weapon." I looked at my name, typed and handwritten, real and forged, and I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let theirs be the only version that lived. If I couldn't be the daughter they remembered, I'd become the name they couldn't erase. We met at a diner just off the freeway, one of those places that still had jukeboxes at every booth and poured coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime last week. It was early, too early for heavy conversations, but I could tell by the way Glenda held the envelope that she'd already lost sleep over it. She slid it across the table, her hand trembling just slightly. "I should have given you this a long time ago." I peeled back the flap carefully. Inside was a notarized affidavit, Glenda's own sworn statement. It confirmed what I had suspected and what no one in my family thought I'd be able to prove. Ruth had once told Glenda, in no uncertain terms, that she wanted me to have the Dallas house, that it was a way of thanking me for the years I had spent taking care of her when others were too busy or too proud. The document detailed conversations, dates, and most damning of all, how Vera had later instructed Glenda to keep quiet, said it would only complicate things. Glenda's signature was at the bottom, next to a notary seal from a bank branch downtown. She looked down into her lap. "I thought silence would protect the peace," she said, "but there was no peace to begin with." I nodded. No judgment. No absolution. I just tucked the envelope into my folder, next to the original will and the forged one Vera had filed. The stack was growing, and with every new piece, the story they were telling cracked further. By the time I returned to my car, the clouds had started to build again, slow, heavy, pregnant with rain. I pulled over at a gas station for a soda and a few minutes of quiet. That's when I saw the missed call. Unknown number. Followed by a voicemail. I played it on speaker. Vera's voice filled the car, louder than she'd ever dared speak to my face. "I told him not to get back with her," she was saying casually, like she was sharing recipe tips. "I said she was unstable, vindictive. You don't want someone like that attached to your future. I just couldn't risk her gaining ground again." My hand tightened on the steering wheel. The him was clearly Caleb, my ex, the one person who had tried to reconnect with me last year after our split. We never got very far, and now I understood why. Even when they weren't stealing from me, they were sabotaging every path I tried to rebuild. Quietly, systematically. I saved the voicemail, uploaded it to my evidence drive, titled it, "Character Defamation, Personal Impact." That night, I sat at my desk back in Austin. My folders were open, both digital and physical. Highlighters marked dates. Sticky notes flagged timelines. Printed emails, voice recordings, bank transactions, all arranged like blueprints of betrayal. I opened a fresh file and typed one word across the top: restoration. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even personal anymore. It was truth. Oprah once said, "Truth allows you to live your life with integrity. When you operate in truth, you never have to look over your shoulder." That stuck with me. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one watching my back. I had receipts. I had names, timestamps, and signatures. And tomorrow the court would hear their version. Mine would arrive with documents, dates, and decency. The morning after the hearing, I didn't reach for my phone right away. For the first time in what felt like months, the quiet wasn't a threat. It was a relief. The walls of my apartment didn't press inward like they used to. I cracked the window, let the cool air rush in, and stood in it, barefoot, long enough to feel the difference in my breath. Missed calls, texts, emails, they blinked and pinged in the background. People I hadn't heard from in years now suddenly remembered my name. Reporters, church acquaintances, curious coworkers. I ignored them all. I made coffee, slow and methodical, sat at the table where most of my fight had begun, and let the silence sit beside me like a long-lost friend. But before noon, I was on the road again, this time not to confront anyone, not to uncover anything, just to retrieve what was mine, in the most literal sense. The old shed behind my childhood home hadn't changed. The boards were still warped from that hailstorm in '07, and the latch was just as stubborn as I remembered. I didn't knock on the front door, didn't text Ruth. I wasn't there for them. I circled around back. The grass had grown too high, soaked from last week's rain. It clung to my shoes as I stepped behind the shed, crouched low, and began clearing away the debris. Beneath a soggy tarp and half-rotted cardboard was the box. It had been left there on purpose, the kind of hiding that only families do, with just enough deniability to call it an accident. Inside were letters from my father, old, neat handwriting from when he still believed in postcards and folded jokes. There were pictures of Ruth and me in the garden, planting tomatoes that never grew right. There was a medal from my third deployment, still in its velvet case, still unmentioned by anyone in that house. I didn't cry. I just closed the lid. The past didn't need an audience to be real. Back in my car, I placed the box in the passenger seat and drove away without glancing at the windows. I didn't expect anyone to be watching. And that was fine. Later that night, in Austin, I wrote a letter. Not to mail. Not even to keep. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was a transfer of weight. To whom it no longer concerns, you may keep the silence. You may keep the version of me that made you feel superior. I return the guilt, the shrinking, the waiting. I do not ask for peace. I reclaim the time I spent trying to earn it. I folded it once and burned it in the kitchen sink. The next morning, I took a walk through the old park, now mostly redone with synthetic turf and splash pads. But the hill was still there, the one where my dad had taught me to ride a bike. I could hear his voice in memory, not soft but firm. Eyes up. Don't wait for permission. Go. They used to say I failed the family. But the truth was, they failed the idea of what a family could be. As I passed the library bench, my phone buzzed. An email from the National Veterans Advocacy Network. Subject: Keynote Invitation. Family Financial Abuse and Integrity in Recovery. I read the email 3 times. Then, without hesitation, I replied, yes. I didn't need their house. I didn't need their name. I had my voice. I left the house behind, and with it, every story they ever tried to write in my name. The rain never actually fell that morning. It just hovered, thick in the air like something unsaid, the kind of silence you can feel in your lungs. I stepped out of the cab in front of the courthouse in downtown Dallas, the red folder in my hand pressed against my chest, not from fear, but from finality. Inside, the courtroom buzzed quietly. Polite nods, murmured legal jargon, papers shuffled like props in a bad play. Vera sat across the aisle, flanked by her attorney and an image consultant I recognized from local news interviews. Ruth was beside her hair pinned neatly, her expression pinned tighter. Darwin didn't look up when I entered. Of course he didn't. I walked in calmly. Charcoal suit, no jewelry, no flash, just the red folder. The judge called us to order. Voices dropped, chairs scraped against marble. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't clear my throat. I didn't preface anything with "I'm sorry" or "with respect." I walked to the front, opened the folder, and placed a single document on the bench. "Your Honor," I began, "this is a certified copy of my mother's original will, signed 4 years ago, alongside notarized witness testimony and digital metadata verifying the creation and subsequent concealment of this document." A few gasps scattered through the room like coughs. I slid a second sheet forward. This audio file contains the plaintiff, Vera Cessna, in conversation, admitting to intentional character defamation of the defendant, myself, including sabotage of professional and personal relationships. The judge paused, read, listened, then slowly raised a hand for silence. No one moved. Even the stenographer stopped typing. I didn't look at Vera. I didn't need to. After court adjourned, I walked outside without speaking to anyone. I didn't shake hands, didn't smile for the reporters gathering on the steps. The air was heavier now, but still dry. The clouds had finally given up. In my car, I opened the glove box and pulled out an envelope. Old, yellowing, addressed to my father in my neatest handwriting. The ink slightly smudged from that night. I sat on my balcony, debating whether or not to send it. I had sent it, eventually. It came back unopened. I stared at it, holding it against the steering wheel. Then I stepped out, crossed the street, and tore it slowly, evenly, right down the middle. I dropped the pieces into the blue mailbox on the corner and turned away without watching them fall. I had waited so long for them to hear me, but they never planned to listen. That night, I didn't go out. I didn't celebrate. I brewed tea, lit a candle, and opened my laptop. A new document blinked back at me, untitled. I typed, "They said family doesn't betray. They were right. Real family doesn't. But when blood becomes a brand, you're not a daughter. You're a liability." The judge had ordered a full investigation into Vera's handling of family assets. Ruth resigned from the church board the next day, citing health reasons. No statement, no apology, just silence. Their favorite tactic. I didn't answer the media calls. I didn't gloat. I filed paperwork for my nonprofit 2 weeks later, an initiative to support veterans and women who've experienced financial betrayal within their families. It felt right, like sewing new fabric from the threads they tried to tear apart. Maya Angelou once said, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." And I believed her. At my desk, in my home, with the lamp casting soft gold across my keyboard, I typed my first blog post. A simple message. A story of truth, not just mine, but of others who've sat in rooms where their names were twisted into threats. I hit publish. That single page didn't just end the story they wrote, it let me start my own.